Tonight, we're diving into something strange. Forgotten medieval myths, tales of demons hiding in trees, of saints with talking heads, and of animals put on trial. Stories that once shaped entire villages, and terrified them too. But before we begin, if you enjoy myth stories like this, feel free to support the channel with a free subscription. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? I read every comment. It's always wild to see people tuning in from all over the world. Now take a deep breath and relax. This is Myth Night, where you relax and I tell you myth stories. And if you fall asleep before it ends, that's okay. Some myths were meant to be finished in dreams. In the deepest chamber of a crumbling monastery, outside what is now Florence, Brother Thomas bends over his manuscript, his quill trembling slightly as candlelight dances across parchment yellowed with age. The year is 1347, and he is recording something that fills him with both fascination and dread. The legend of the creature they call the basilisk, the king of serpents. I write these words, he scratches carefully in Latin, not to spread fear, but so that knowledge might protect the innocent from what knowledge itself has created. The story he records begins not with a monster, but with an egg. Not the egg of any ordinary creature, but something far more unnatural, an egg laid by a serpent, but incubated by a cockerel. Or perhaps, some sources whispered, an egg laid by a cockerel in its 7th year of life, nurtured in the warm decay of a dunghill until something abominable could break free from its shell. Brother Thomas pauses in his writing, his mind drifting to the accounts he has gathered from travelers and scholars, each tale more disturbing than the last. They speak of a creature no longer than a man's forearm, crowned with a crest like a rooster's comb, whose body moves with the fluid grace of a serpent, but whose eyes hold the power to kill with a single glance. The basilisk, they say, is born from corruption itself, from the unnatural union of elements that were never meant to combine. In the medieval mind, this made perfect sense. The world was filled with boundaries that should not be crossed, natural orders that should not be disturbed. When those boundaries were violated, when the natural became unnatural, the result was inevitably monstrous. In the monastery's scriptorium, other monks work in concentrated silence, copying sacred texts and illuminating manuscripts with gold leaf that catches the light like captured starfire. But Brother Thomas finds himself drawn again and again to these darker stories, these legends that speak of how creation itself can be corrupted, how life can become death wearing the mask of life. The accounts he studies would describe the basilisk's lair as a place where even stones die. Not crumble or decay, but actually die, becoming something less than mineral, less than matter, approaching the void that exists before God, speaks light into darkness. Trees within a mile of the creature's dwelling wither not from disease, but from proximity to something that negates life itself. The very air grows thick with death, writes one chronicler whose name has been lost to time. And birds fall from the sky, not because they have seen the beast, but because they have breathed the same air it has breathed. Wells become poisoned not by venom, but by the creature's exhalation, which carries within it the essence of unbeing. Brother Thomas imagines the basilisk moving through its realm of induced sterility, a creature that exists as nature's own contradiction. Every step it takes leaves behind not a footprint, but an absence, a small space where the earth forgets how to be earth. Every breath it draws pulls life from the surrounding air. Every glance it casts steals existence from whatever meets its gaze. The medieval mind, so different from our own, did not question whether such things could be possible. Instead, it asked what they meant, what moral lesson could be drawn from their existence. The basilisk became a symbol of sin itself, something that begins small, seemingly insignificant, but grows to consume everything around it, like pride, like envy, like the corruption that can take root in a human heart and eventually poison every word, every action, every relationship. But the legend offered hope as well as horror. For every monster, medieval wisdom insisted God provided a defense. Against the basilisk's deadly gaze, there was the mirror, a polished surface that could reflect the creature's power back upon itself. Against its poisonous breath, there was rue, a humble herb that even peasants could grow in their gardens. Against its very existence, there was the crow of a cockerel, whose pure and natural sound could shatter the unnatural life of the Serpent King. In the castle of Count Alessandro di Verona, 300 miles to the north, a very different scene unfolds. The Count sits in his private chamber, surrounded by advisors whose faces are drawn with worry. For weeks, livestock in the surrounding countryside have been found dead without apparent cause, not attacked, not diseased, simply dead, their bodies unmarked, but their eyes clouded with a strange milky film. Could it be, whispers his eldest advisor, a man whose gray beard speaks of decades spent navigating the treacherous waters of noble politics? The Count knows what he is asking. The stories they all grew up with, the legends that seemed like children's tales, until reality began to mirror their darkest imaginings. He thinks of the merchant who arrived yesterday, babbling about a creature he glimpsed in the forest, something that moved like liquid death, whose gaze he dared not meet, but whose presence he felt like ice in his bones. Send word to the monasteries, the Count decides. Ask them what defenses the old books recommend, and tell the people to carry mirrors when they must travel, to keep cockerels in their courtyards, to plant rue around their homes. His advisors nod solemnly, understanding that they are crossing from the world of rational governance into the realm of ancient wisdom, from the politics of men into the deeper politics of good and evil, natural and unnatural, blessed and cursed. In the village of San Marco, nestled in the valley below the Count's castle, old Maria tends her herb garden as she has for 60 years. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, but steady with long practice, gather the silvery green leaves of rue that grows in abundance beside her cottage door. She has always grown rue. Her grandmother taught her, and her grandmother's grandmother before that. Protection, the old women had whispered, against the evil eye, against poison, against things that should not be, but sometimes are. Maria never questioned the wisdom of her ancestors. In a world where the boundary between the seen and unseen was gossamer thin, where every shadow might conceal a miracle or a monster, such knowledge was not superstition, but survival. She bundles the rue with practiced efficiency, knowing that by morning there will be a line of customers at her door, people who have heard the rumors, felt the strange change in the air, decided that ancient wisdom might be worth the price of a few copper coins. As night falls across the countryside, Brother Thomas finishes his entry about the basilisk, his careful script forming words that will outlive empires. Thus we learn that corruption, once given form, seeks always to corrupt further. But God, in his mercy, provides always the means by which corruption may be turned back upon itself, by which death may be defeated, not through strength, but through purity, not through violence, but through the simple truth that what is natural and good is stronger than what is unnatural and evil. He sets down his quill and looks around the scriptorium, where other monks continue their quiet work by candlelight. Outside the monastery walls, the world sleeps uneasily, troubled by dreams of creatures that exist at the intersection of possibility and nightmare. But inside these sacred walls, the work of preservation continues, not just of books and knowledge, but of hope itself, the belief that understanding can overcome fear, that light can dispel darkness, that even the most terrible legends serve ultimately to point toward truth. The basilisk may exist only in the realm of myth, but the corruption it represents is real enough, and the defenses against it, purity, humility, faith in what is good and natural, are as valid now as they were when the first scribe set quill to parchment and wrote, "Beware the creature born of unnatural unions, for it brings not life but the negation of life, and only the innocent may stand against it without being consumed." Myth number 2. In the candlelit scriptorium of the Abbey of Saint Denis, just outside Paris, Brother Jerome copies a passage that makes his hand pause mid-stroke. The year is 1250, and the manuscript before him contains a story so extraordinary, so impossible, and yet so persistent that it has begun to spread through Christendom like ripples across still water. Between Leo IV and Benedict III, he reads from his source, "There reigned a woman who concealed her sex under the appearance of a man. She was called John the Englishman, and her reign lasted 2 years, 7 months, and 4 days." Brother Jerome sets down his quill and stares at the words. In the silence of the scriptorium, where only the scratch of pens and the whisper of turning pages usually disturb the holy quiet, this statement seems to echo with impossible implications. A woman pope? A female successor to St. Peter? The very idea challenges everything he understands about the natural order, about divine will, about the structure of God's creation. But the story refuses to be dismissed. It has taken root in the collective imagination of medieval Europe, growing in detail and complexity, with each telling acquiring the weight of history even as historians debate its truth. Jerome has heard it whispered in monastery corridors, debated in university halls, recounted by travelers who swear they heard it from reliable sources. The tale begins, as so many medieval stories do, with transformation and disguise. In a small village in England, a girl is born with a mind that hungers for knowledge as intensely as her body hungers for bread. But knowledge in the 9th century is largely the province of men. Women may learn domestic skills, may absorb religious instruction sufficient for their salvation, but the deeper mysteries of theology, philosophy, and scholarship are closed to them as surely as if they were locked behind monastery walls. So she does what countless women throughout history have done when society's restrictions clash with their own aspirations. She transforms herself into what she needs to be. With shears and determination, she cuts away her hair, her feminine clothing, her very identity as a woman. She becomes John, a young man with a quick mind and a passion for learning that impresses even the most demanding teachers. Years pass. John distinguishes himself at the cathedral school in Athens, masters the complexities of Latin and Greek, demonstrates such brilliance in theological debate that his reputation spreads throughout the scholarly world. She moves to Rome, where papal administrators are always in need of capable clerks, skilled theologians, competent bureaucrats who can navigate the complex politics of medieval Christianity. In the Vatican Palace, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of centuries, the woman who calls herself John continues her impossible masquerade. She drafts papal letters, advises on matters of doctrine, participates in the intricate dance of ecclesiastical politics. Her fellow clerks see nothing unusual in this scholarly young man whose voice never quite deepened into masculine authority, whose face remains curiously smooth, whose body seems always hidden beneath the voluminous robes that mark his clerical status. The medieval mind, so different from our own, was both more credulous and more practical than we might expect. In an age when personal hygiene was rudimentary and privacy was a luxury few could afford, it was nevertheless possible for someone determined enough to maintain such a deception. The robes of clergy were concealing by design. The life of a scholar was often solitary by necessity, and the assumption that someone in clerical dress was indeed male was so strong that few would think to question it. As John's reputation grows, so does his influence within the papal court. When Leo IV dies and the cardinals gather to choose his successor, the name of John the Englishman is proposed alongside more obvious candidates. Here is a scholar of unquestioned ability, a theologian of recognized wisdom, an administrator of proven competence. The fact that no one has thought to question whether this impressive cleric is actually a woman speaks to both the perfection of the disguise and the blindness of assumption. The coronation takes place in St. Peter's Basilica, surrounded by all the pomp and ceremony that marks the elevation of a new pontiff. The woman who has spent her life pretending to be a man now sits on the throne of St. Peter, receiving the homage of cardinals and bishops, accepting the keys of heaven and earth, becoming the earthly representative of Christ himself. For 2 years and 7 months, according to the legend, Pope Joan reigns with wisdom and competence. She issues papal bulls, settles theological disputes, oversees the vast bureaucracy of medieval Christianity. The deception holds, the masquerade continues, the impossible becomes routine. In the papal apartments, behind doors guarded by Swiss soldiers, the secret remains locked away with other mysteries of state. But nature, the medieval mind understood, has its own laws that cannot be permanently suspended by human will. The woman who became a man who became pope carries within her body the fundamental truth of her biological identity, and that truth, suppressed for so long, finally demands acknowledgement in the most dramatic way possible. The revelation comes during a papal procession, one of those elaborate ceremonies by which the medieval church displayed its power and glory to the people of Rome. Pope Joan, dressed in full pontifical regalia, rides through the streets on a white palfrey, blessing the crowds that line the route. But as the procession passes between the Colosseum and the Church of San Clemente, the pontiff suddenly doubles over in pain. What happens next depends on which version of the legend you believe. Some say she gave birth right there on the street, her secret revealed in the most public way possible as the crowds watched in shock and amazement. Others claim she died in that moment, overcome by the physical crisis her body could no longer postpone. Still others suggest she was immediately recognized for what she was and killed by the outraged mob. But all versions agree on the aftermath, the complete erasure of Pope Joan from official records. The Church, faced with the impossible scandal of a female pontiff, chose the only response it considered acceptable to pretend it had never happened. Her name was struck from the papal lists, her decrees were attributed to other pontiffs, her very existence was denied so thoroughly that later historians would debate whether she had ever lived at all. Yet the story persisted, spreading through the underground networks of medieval gossip, growing stronger rather than weaker with each official denial. In the taverns of Rome, in the marketplaces of Paris, in the pilgrim hostels along the great roads of Europe, people whispered the tale of the woman who had fooled everyone, who had risen to the highest position in Christendom through the sheer force of her intelligence and determination. For women throughout medieval Europe, the legend of Pope Joan became something precious and dangerous, proof that the barriers society erected could be overcome, that the restrictions placed on female achievement were human rather than divine in origin. In the quiet hours when wives and daughters gathered around their looms, when nuns walked in their cloister gardens, when merchants' wives supervised their households, the story was told and retold, each telling adding new details, new interpretations, new hope. But for the male hierarchy of medieval Christianity, the legend represented a nightmare, the possibility that their assumptions about gender, authority, and divine order were not as fixed as they believed. If a woman could successfully impersonate a man for decades, if she could master theology and politics and administration as well as any male, if she could even become pope without anyone noticing. What did that say about the natural superiority they claimed? In the Abbey scriptorium, Brother Jerome continues his copying, but his mind wanders to the implications of the story before him. Could it have been true? In a world where identity was largely a matter of clothing and assumption, where medical knowledge was limited and privacy was possible, could such a deception have succeeded? He thinks of the women he has known, his mother, whose practical wisdom guided their household, his sister, whose quick mind had always impressed their village priest, the abbess of the nearby convent, whose administrative skills rivaled those of any male superior. Given the opportunity, given the desperate motivation, might any of them have attempted what Pope Joan allegedly achieved? The candles burn lower as Jerome works, their light flickering across pages that record not just a story but a possibility. The radical suggestion that the divisions between male and female capability exist more in human prejudice than in divine law. Whether Pope Joan ever actually lived, the legend she represents continues to challenge, to inspire, to remind us that the boundaries we take for granted may be more fragile than we imagine. In the growing darkness outside the monastery walls, the medieval world settles into another night of dreams and nightmares, of legends that may or may not be true, but that speak to truths too deep for simple verification. And somewhere in that darkness, the ghost of Pope Joan continues her eternal reign, not over the Vatican, but over the human imagination, reminding us that sometimes the most impossible stories are the ones that tell us the most about what might actually be possible. Myth number 3. In a walled garden behind the manor house of Sir Edmund de Vere, the autumn moon casts long shadows between rows of carefully tended herbs. The year is 1324, and the estate's herbalist, Master Aldrich, kneels beside a plot of earth where something extraordinary and terrible is said to grow beneath the surface, something that no wise person would dare to harvest with their own hands. Master Aldrich has spent his entire adult life working with plants that heal and plants that harm, with roots that cure and leaves that kill. His weathered hands have gathered foxglove for heart ailments, belladonna for pain relief, digitalis for dropsy. He knows which mushrooms bring visions and which bring death, which berries can ease childbirth and which can end pregnancy. But the plant he contemplates tonight challenges even his extensive knowledge of botanical mysteries. The mandrake root, they say, grows only where the blood of innocence has touched the earth. Some claim it springs from the ground beneath gallows, nourished by the final struggles of the hanged. Others insist it appears where virgins have been buried or where children have died violent deaths. All agree that its origins are connected to human suffering, to the intersection of life and death, to the thin places where the natural world absorbs something unnatural. Master Aldrich circles the plot slowly, his lantern casting moving shadows that make the earth seem to writhe and shift. Somewhere beneath his feet, he knows, the mandrake waits, a root that grows in the shape of a tiny human being, complete with arms, legs, torso, and head. A vegetable homunculus, a plant person, a fusion of the botanical and anthropomorphic that defies all rational categorization. But what makes the mandrake truly dangerous, according to every text he has studied, every wise woman he has consulted, every scholar he has corresponded with, is not its shape, but its voice. For when the mandrake is pulled from the earth, when its root body is torn from the soil that has nourished it, it releases a scream of such pure agony, such concentrated anguish, that any human who hears it will immediately fall dead. The scream, the legends insist, contains within it all the pain that has ever existed, every wound, every loss, every moment of suffering since the world began. It is not merely loud, but metaphysically terrible, a sound that strikes not just the ears, but the soul itself, that vibrates in frequencies that human consciousness cannot process without shattering. Master Aldrich has prepared for this moment with the careful planning of a military campaign. The method he will employ has been passed down through generations of herbalists, refined through countless harvests, tested by those brave or desperate enough to seek the mandrake's legendary properties. For despite its terrible voice, the mandrake root is perhaps the most valuable plant in the medieval pharmacopoeia, a cure for barrenness, a protection against demons, an ingredient in love potions and truth serums, and the philosopher's stone itself. In the stable behind the manor house, a large mastiff sleeps peacefully, unaware that it has been chosen for a role in this night's work. The dog belongs to the stable master, a man who owed Master Aldrich a significant debt and was willing to discharge it in this unusual way. Tomorrow, the stable master will be told that his dog died heroically in service to knowledge. Tonight, the animal serves as an unwitting instrument in humanity's eternal struggle to obtain power over forces that perhaps should remain undisturbed. Master Aldrich returns to the garden carrying a stout rope, one end of which is already fashioned into a noose. The other end he ties securely around the mastiff's collar. The dog, accustomed to being handled by humans, submits to this treatment with the trusting patience of domesticated animals everywhere. It cannot know that it is about to become a participant in a ritual that stretches back to the earliest recorded history of plant lore. The herbalist moves carefully around the plot, studying the surface of the earth for the telltale signs that indicate a mandrake's presence. A slight depression in the soil, perhaps, or a subtle difference in the color of the grass. Some say the plant glows faintly in the moonlight. Others claim it creates a circle of dead ground around its hiding place. Master Aldrich trusts his experience more than folklore, looking for the practical signs that any experienced gardener would recognize. The way the earth settles differently when something substantial grows beneath it, the subtle patterns that indicate root systems of unusual size and complexity. Finally, he identifies the spot. With a small trowel, he begins to dig, working slowly and carefully, clearing the earth away from what he hopes is the mandrake's crown. The work is delicate. Too much force might damage the root. Too little might leave it too deeply buried to be extracted effectively. As he digs, Master Aldrich finds himself thinking about the other herbalists who have performed this same ritual, the long chain of plant gatherers who have risked their lives to harvest nature's most dangerous gifts. The dog waits patiently, occasionally sniffing at the disturbed earth, but showing no sign of distress. In the medieval understanding of animal consciousness, the mastiff is both blessed and cursed by its inability to comprehend what is about to happen. Blessed because it will not suffer the anticipatory terror that would torment a human in its position. Cursed because it cannot make the choice to participate or refuse, cannot weigh the risks against the benefits, cannot exercise the moral agency that separates rational creatures from their unreasoning fellows. When the crown of the root is finally exposed, Master Aldrich can see that his identification was correct. The mandrake lies just beneath the surface, its humanoid shape clearly visible even in the uncertain light of his lantern. It is smaller than he expected, no larger than a newborn infant, but perfectly formed, with what appear to be tiny arms crossed over its chest, legs folded in a position that suggests both sleep and death. Working with infinite care, Master Aldrich clears more earth away from the root body, exposing the narrow neck that connects it to its taproot system. This is the crucial moment, the point at which the mandrake is most vulnerable and most dangerous. Still connected to the earth, but nearly free, it exists in the liminal state between plant and harvest, between natural and unnatural, between silent growth and screaming death. The herbalist loops the free end of the rope around the exposed neck of the mandrake, creating what amounts to a noose for a vegetable person. The knot must be secure enough to hold under the stress of extraction, but positioned carefully enough not to damage the delicate root flesh. Master Aldrich has practiced this technique on ordinary carrots and parsnips, but he knows that no amount of practice with conventional plants can truly prepare him for working with something that exists at the intersection of botany and magic. With the rope properly positioned, Master Aldrich retreats to a safe distance, paying out line as he goes. The next phase of the operation requires precise timing and a certain amount of faith in the wisdom of his predecessors. He must create enough noise to mask the mandrake's scream, wake the dog from its peaceful sleep, and somehow induce it to run in the direction that will provide the force necessary to extract the root. From his leather satchel, Master Aldrich removes a small horn, not a musical instrument, but a practical tool used by hunters to signal their hounds. He has stuffed his ears with wool soaked in beeswax, but he knows that such protection is imperfect. If the legends are true, if the mandrake's scream really does possess the power to kill, then his survival depends on the horn blast drowning out the lethal sound, on the dog's extraction of the root happening quickly enough that the scream has no time to build to its full terrifying power. Mr. Aldrich raises the horn to his lips and blows with all the force his lungs can provide. The blast echoes across the garden, sharp and urgent, designed to wake every living thing within half a mile. The mastiff jerks awake, startled and confused, and begins to bark in response to what it perceives as some kind of alarm or summons. But the dog does not immediately run in the direction Master Aldrich needs it to go. Instead, it turns in circles, trying to identify the source of the horn blast, still tethered to the mandrake by the rope that now represents the difference between success and catastrophe. Master Aldrich continues blowing the horn, varying his position to encourage the animal to move away from the garden plot, pulling gently on his end of the rope to suggest the direction he wants the dog to follow. Finally, whether through understanding or confusion, the mastiff begins to run. The rope goes taut, jerks against the mandrake's neck, and suddenly the root tears free from the earth with a sound that cuts through the night like a blade through silk. The scream is exactly what the legends promised, not quite human and not quite animal, but something in between, something that speaks to parts of the mind that human language has never learned to address. It is the sound of earth itself crying out in pain, of nature protesting its violation, of the boundary between animate and inanimate being crossed by force rather than invitation. Master Aldrich feels the sound in his bones, in his teeth, in the space behind his eyes where thoughts form and dissolve. The wool in his ears provides some protection, but he can still hear the mandrake's voice, still feel its anguish resonating through his body like a struck tuning fork. For a moment that feels like an eternity. He wonders if the protection he has taken is sufficient, if he will join the ranks of herbalists who died in pursuit of botanical mysteries. But the scream fades as quickly as it began, leaving behind only the normal sounds of night, wind in the trees, the distant lowing of cattle, the dog's continued barking as it struggles with the burden now attached to its collar. Master Aldrich removes the wool from his ears with trembling hands and discovers that he can still hear, still think, still breathe. The mandrake's scream was terrible but not lethal, at least not when properly managed. The mastiff has collapsed from exhaustion or fear, but it still lives, panting heavily as it lies on the garden path with the mandrake root trailing behind it, like some bizarre tale. Master Aldrich approaches carefully, speaking soothingly to the animal as he unties the rope from its collar. The dog will recover, he thinks, though it may never again sleep quite as peacefully as it did before this night. The mandrake root lies in the grass, looking smaller and more ordinary than it did when growing in the earth. But Master Aldrich knows that appearances are deceiving, that this small humanoid plant represents one of nature's most concentrated repositories of power and mystery. Over the coming weeks, he will dry it carefully, divide it into portions, prepare it according to the ancient formulas that govern its use in everything from fertility treatments to protective charms. But for now, he simply holds it in his hands and marvels at the weight of it, not just the physical weight of root and fiber, but the metaphysical weight of all the stories it carries, all the hopes and fears it represents, all the desperate human needs that drive people to seek power in the screaming voices of plants that grow in the shape of men. As dawn approaches, Master Aldrich returns to his workshop to begin the slow work of preservation and preparation. The mandrake root will serve many purposes in the months to come, will be part of remedies and rituals, will carry forward the ancient human dream of mastering the natural world through understanding its deepest mysteries. But he will never forget the sound it made when torn from the earth, the voice of something that existed at the boundary between plant and person, between natural and supernatural, between the silence of growing things and the terrible eloquence of pain made audible. It was a sound that belonged neither to the world of reason nor to the world of faith, but to that strange middle realm where medieval minds found both their greatest fears and their most precious hopes. Myth number 4. On a cobblestone street in the city of Cologne, where the great cathedral rises like a prayer made manifest in stone, an old man walks slowly through the morning market. His footsteps echo with a peculiar resonance, as if each step carries more weight than flesh and bone should bear. The merchants who see him pause in their hawking, not from recognition, for who could recognize someone who has no fixed appearance, but from something else, some quality in his movement that speaks of distances that cannot be measured in miles. The year might be 1298 or 1189 or 1456. For this man, time moves differently. The seasons change around him like pages turning in a book he can never finish reading, and the cities he passes through rise and fall like waves on an ocean. He can never stop sailing. He has been walking for more than 1,000 years, and he will walk for 1,000 more, carrying with him the weight of a single moment, a single choice, a single failure of compassion that earned him eternity as punishment. His name, when he chooses to give one, changes with the centuries. Cartaphilus, some have called him, Ahasuerus, Isaac Lacadim. But names are just sounds that mortals use to organize their understanding, and this man has moved beyond the need for such organization. He is simply the wanderer, the one who cannot rest, the living embodiment of perpetual motion and eternal displacement. In the workshop of Master Herman the cobbler, tucked between a baker's shop and a wine merchant's stall, the morning light streams through windows, thick with the distortions of hand-blown glass. Master Herman looks up from his work, a fine pair of boots for one of the cathedral canons, when he hears the slow footsteps pause outside his door. Something about the rhythm of those steps makes him set down his awl and listen more carefully. The door opens with the soft creak of old hinges, and the stranger enters. He is neither young nor old, neither tall nor short, with features that seem to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. His clothes are well made but worn, suggesting long travel rather than poverty. His shoes, and Master Herman, being a cobbler, notices shoes first, are of excellent construction, but show the kind of wear that comes not from months of use, but from decades, perhaps centuries of constant walking. "Good morning, Master Craftsman," the stranger says, and his voice carries accents that Herman cannot quite place. Sometimes it sounds like the German of the Northern Territories, sometimes like the French spoken in the Southern Kingdoms, sometimes like something older, more fundamental, as if he learned to speak when languages were fewer and simpler. Master Herman nods politely. "Good morning, traveler. How may I serve you?" The stranger looks around the workshop, taking in the leather and tools, the half-finished shoes and boots that line the shelves, the careful order that speaks of a craftsman who takes pride in his work. "I have need of shoes," he says simply. "I walk much, and I am hard on footwear." It is not an unusual request. Cobblers make their living from people who need shoes, but something in the way the stranger says it, some quality of resigned weariness, makes Master Herman study his customer more carefully. The man's current shoes, as he noted, are excellently made, but they show wear patterns that don't quite make sense. The soles are worn thin, not just at heel and toe, but evenly across their entire surface, as if the wearer's gait were so perfectly measured that every step distributed its force with mathematical precision. Where do you travel to? Master Herman asks as he begins to take measurements. It is a natural question. Knowing a customer's intended destination helps a cobbler recommend the appropriate style and construction. The stranger is quiet for so long that Herman wonders if he heard the question. When he finally speaks, his answer comes slowly, as if the words are being pulled up from a great depth. I travel everywhere and nowhere. I am going to a place I can never reach, by a route that has no end. Master Herman has heard pilgrims speak in such riddles, has listened to merchants describe trade routes in terms that made geography sound like theology. But this man's words carry a different quality, a literalness that makes the cobbler's hands pause in their measuring. Are you perhaps a pilgrim? Herman asks, bound for Jerusalem or Rome or Santiago de Compostela. The stranger's laugh is soft, but contains depths of sadness that make the cobbler step back involuntarily. I have been to Jerusalem, the man says. I was there on a day when the world changed, when God walked among men, when eternity intersected with time. I was there, and He pauses, his eyes focusing on something far beyond the walls of the cobbler's shop. I was there, and I failed to show kindness when kindness was needed most. Master Herman has heard confessions before. His shop, like many small businesses in medieval cities, serves as an informal gathering place where people share their troubles along with their commerce. Merchants confess to dishonest dealings, wives admit to infidelity, priests acknowledge their struggles with faith. But this confession feels different, weightier, as if the man is speaking of events that happened not years ago, but moments ago, wounds still fresh despite the impossibility of such freshness. I was a doorkeeper, the stranger continues, his voice taking on the cadence of someone recounting a story that has been told many times, always the same, always true. I had a house in Jerusalem, a good position, a comfortable life. And on a certain day, when a man carrying a cross passed my door, when he stopped for a moment's rest against my wall, I drove him away. Move on, I said. You cannot rest here. Move on. The cobbler's hands have stopped their work entirely now. He knows this story, has heard it whispered in taverns and proclaimed from pulpits, has seen it depicted in the margins of illuminated manuscripts and carved into the stones of cathedral facades. The man who refused rest to Christ on his way to Calvary, who earned in return the curse of perpetual motion, who was condemned to wander until the second coming. And he looked at me, the stranger whispers, his eyes now focusing directly on Master Herman with an intensity that makes the cobbler feel as if he is being seen for the first time in his life. He looked at me with eyes that held all the sadness of the world, and he said, I go to my rest, but you shall walk until I come again. The silence in the workshop stretches like a held breath. Outside, the sounds of the market continue, vendors calling their wares, children playing, cartwheels clattering over cobblestones. But inside, time seems to have stopped, suspended between confession and absolution, between story and truth. Master Herman realizes that his hands are shaking, not from fear exactly, but from proximity to something that transcends ordinary experience. If this man is indeed who he claims to be, then Herman is face to face with living history, with someone who witnessed the crucifixion, who saw Christ die and rise again, who carries within his memory the most important events in human history. Do you... Herman's voice cracks, and he clears his throat. Do you remember it clearly? That day? The stranger nods slowly. Every detail, the weight of the air, the smell of blood and dust, the sound his feet made on the stones. I remember the texture of his robe, where it brushed against my door, the way the light fell across his face when he looked at me. I remember the exact tone of his voice when he pronounced my fate. I remember all of it, all the time, as if it happened this morning. He pauses, looking down at his worn shoes. That is part of the curse, you see. I cannot forget. Other men forget their sins, forget their failures, let time heal their wounds. But I must carry that moment with me always, must relive it with each step I take, must feel again and again the weight of the choice I made when compassion was needed and I offered only hardness. Master Herman finds himself weeping, though he cannot say exactly why. Perhaps for the stranger's eternal suffering, perhaps for the cruelty of a punishment that allows no forgiveness, no release, no hope of redemption. Or perhaps for something deeper, the recognition that every human being carries within them the capacity for the same failure, the same hardness of heart, the same refusal to offer help when help is desperately needed. But surely, Hermann says through his tears, surely there must be some way to find peace, some act of contrition, some service you could perform. The stranger shakes his head gently. I have tried everything. I have given alms to every beggar I have encountered, have built hospitals and orphanages, have saved lives, and eased suffering in every way I can imagine. But the curse is not about what I do now. It is about what I failed to do then. And that moment, that choice, cannot be undone. He looks around the workshop again, taking in the tools and leather, the evidence of honest work and simple pride in craftsmanship. But I have learned things in my wandering. I have seen empires rise and fall, have watched languages be born and die, have observed the endless cycle of human hope and despair. And I have learned that compassion, when it is given freely, is the most precious thing in the world. More valuable than gold, more lasting than stone, more powerful than any force known to man. Master Herman wipes his eyes and returns to his measuring, though his hands still shake slightly. What kind of shoes do you need? He asks, his voice gentle with newfound understanding. Strong ones, the stranger replies. Comfortable for long walking, well built to last. I cannot tell you how long I will need them, for I do not know where my path leads or when it might end. But I can tell you that whoever makes them will be doing a kindness and kindness. He smiles sadly. Kindness is always remembered, even by those who are cursed to forget nothing else. As Master Herman begins to select his materials, choosing the finest leather, the strongest thread, the most durable construction methods in his repertoire, he thinks about the story he has just heard. Whether the man is truly the wandering Jew of legend, or simply a madman with an elaborate delusion, seems almost irrelevant. What matters is that he carries with him a truth about the human condition, about the importance of compassion, about the weight that single moments can bear. The cobbler works through the day and into the evening, crafting shoes with more care than he has ever invested in any project. When they are finished, they are masterpieces of the cobbler's art, shoes that will carry their wearer across continents and centuries, that will provide comfort and protection no matter how far the journey extends. When the stranger returns to collect them, he insists on paying full price, despite Master Herman's offer to make them a gift. I have learned, he says as he counts out coins that bear the faces of kings Herman does not recognize, that charity freely given is precious, but work fairly compensated creates dignity for both giver and receiver. As he prepares to leave, the stranger pauses at the door. May I give you a piece of advice, Master Herman? Something I have learned in my long walking? The cobbler nods eagerly. Be kind to strangers. Open your door to those who need rest. Offer water to the thirsty and bread to the hungry, for you never know. His eyes twinkle with something that might be humor or might it be ancient wisdom. You never know when you might be entertaining angels unaware, or when your kindness might be the thing that breaks a curse that has lasted 1,000 years. And with that, he steps out into the street, his new shoes silent on the cobblestones, disappearing into the crowd of ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. Master Herman watches until he can no longer distinguish the stranger from the other travelers, then closes his shop and goes home to his wife and children, carrying with him a story that will change the way he sees every customer who enters his door. For he has learned something that the wandering Jew discovered too late, that the moment when someone needs our help is also the moment when we need to give it, and that the line between blessing and curse often comes down to a single choice, made in a single instant, about whether to offer compassion or turn away. Myth number 5. In the great hall of Ravenscroft Castle, where tapestries depicting the deeds of long-dead heroes hang like memories made tangible, Lady Eleanor examines the ring on her finger with the careful attention that medieval nobility reserved for matters of life and death. The band is fashioned from the finest gold, worked by craftsmen whose skill has earned them patronage from kings. But it is not the gold that commands her attention. It is the stone set within it, a small, dark object that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The toadstone, her physician, Master Aldwin, has assured her, is more valuable than any emerald, more precious than the rarest pearl. For this humble stone, carried in the head of a common toad, possesses the power to detect poison before it can claim a victim's life. In an age when political alliances shift like sand and dinner invitations might conceal deadly intentions, such protection is beyond price. Master Aldwin, a learned man who studied at the university in Paris before taking service with her lord husband, has explained the stone's properties with the careful precision that marks truly scholarly discourse. The toadstone, he told her, is formed within the skull of certain toads through a process that partakes of both natural philosophy and divine mystery. As the toad ages, feeding on insects and smaller creatures, certain essences accumulate in its brain, crystallizing over years into a substance that resonates with the presence of poison. Think of it, my lady, Master Aldwin had said, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of a man discussing his life's work, as a kind of natural philosophy made manifest. The toad, being a creature that exists between earth and water, between the purely terrestrial and the purely aquatic, partakes of both natures. It understands both the poisons that grow in soil and those that flow in streams. The stone that forms in its head is thus a repository of knowledge about both kinds of danger. Lady Eleanor had listened with the focused attention that such matters demanded. In her world, knowledge about poison was not academic but urgently practical. Her husband's position as one of the king's most trusted advisors made their household a target for enemies, both foreign and domestic. Their dinner table was a battlefield where alliances were forged and betrayals planned, where a single cup of wine might determine the fate of kingdoms. The process of obtaining toadstones, Master Aldwin had explained, required both skill and patience. The toads that carried the most potent stones were always the oldest and largest, creatures that had survived long enough to accumulate the maximum concentration of protective essences. But these ancient toads were also the most cunning, the most difficult to capture, the most dangerous to handle. The method passed down through generations of physicians, he had told her, involves placing the toad on a cloth of red scarlet and surrounding it with aromatic herbs, lavender, rosemary, thyme. The creature, stimulated by the scents and the color, will eventually expel the stone from its head. Some say it spits the stone out willingly, others claim it must be frightened into releasing it. But all agree that the toadstone, once expelled, must be gathered quickly before it loses its potency. Lady Eleanor touches the ring now as she watches the servants preparing for the evening's feast. Her husband has invited several neighboring lords, ostensibly to discuss matters of mutual interest, trade agreements, marriage alliances, the defense of their shared borders against the bands of brigands that have been troubling the region. But she knows that such gatherings serve multiple purposes, that beneath the surface of polite conversation flow currents of political calculation, personal ambition, and sometimes deadly intention. The great hall fills with the rich aromas of roasted meat and exotic spices as the feast approaches. Servants hurry between the kitchens and the high table, carrying dishes that represent the best her household can offer. But Lady Eleanor's attention focuses not on the food, but on the people who will consume it. Her husband's guests, their retainers, the various hangers-on who always appear when powerful men gather to discuss important matters. Lord Godwin arrives first, a man whose jovial manner and ready smile mask an intelligence sharp as any blade. His wife accompanies him, a pale woman whose nervous habits suggest she knows more about her husband's business than she admits. Their party includes a dozen retainers, men whose loyalty has been purchased rather than earned, whose presence serves as much to intimidate as to protect. Sir Marcus follows close behind, traveling without his wife, but accompanied by his younger brother, a man whose reputation for violence exceeds even his reputation for drinking. Their entry into the hall carries an undertone of tension, a sense that old grievances simmer just beneath the surface of courtly politeness. As the feast begins, Lady Eleanor finds herself studying faces rather than food, watching for the subtle signs that might indicate hostile intent. A guest who picks at his meal while encouraging others to eat heartily. A serving man who approaches certain seats with unusual nervousness. A cup that sits untouched while its owner engages in animated conversation. But it is her ring that provides the most crucial intelligence. As each course arrives, as wine is poured and bread is broken, Lady Eleanor allows her toadstone to come into contact with her food and drink. The method is subtle, a casual gesture as she reaches for her cup, a moment's contact as she breaks her bread. Master Aldwin has taught her to watch for the signs that indicate the stone's activation, a slight warming against her skin, a tingling sensation, sometimes even a faint luminescence, visible only to the wearer. The first courses pass without incident. The roasted capon is safe, the wine untainted, the elaborate pastries that her cook prepared with such pride innocent of any harmful addition. Lady Eleanor begins to relax, to think that perhaps her precautions were unnecessary, that tonight's gathering will proceed without the darker turns that political dinners sometimes take. But as the servants bring the final course, a magnificent subtlety shaped like a castle, complete with towers and battlements crafted from sugar and spice, her toadstone suddenly grows warm against her finger. Not uncomfortably so, but noticeable, unmistakable, exactly as Master Aldwin had described. Lady Eleanor's training takes over. Without allowing any change in her expression, she continues her conversation with the lady beside her while covertly studying the dessert course. The subtlety appears innocent enough, its elaborate decoration showing no obvious signs of tampering. But the toadstone does not lie. Somewhere in that confection, danger lurks. She watches as the servants begin to divide the elaborate dessert, noting which portions go to which guests. Her husband receives a section from the castle's main tower. Lord Godwin gets a piece that includes one of the corner turrets. Sir Marcus is served from the gatehouse portion. The distribution appears random, determined more by the servant's convenience than by any systematic plan. But Lady Eleanor notices that her own portion comes from the same section as her husband's, that the warmth of her toadstone intensifies when the servant approaches with their shared plate. The poison, whatever it is, has been placed specifically to target the lord and lady of the house, a message as much as a murder attempt, a declaration that their enemies can reach them even in their own hall, surrounded by their own people. The challenge now is to prevent the poisoning without revealing her knowledge of it. To accuse a guest openly of attempted murder would require proof she cannot provide, would create a diplomatic crisis that might prove more dangerous than the poison itself. But to allow the poisoned food to be consumed would be to surrender to an enemy's plan, to accept death rather than risk embarrassment. Lady Eleanor chooses a middle course. As the conversation turns to hunting, a topic that always engages the men's attention, she accidentally knocks over her wine cup, sending its contents spilling across the table and onto the dessert plates. In the confusion that follows, as servants rush to clean up the mess and replace the damaged food, the poisoned subtlety disappears into the general chaos. "How clumsy of me," she laughs, playing the role of the embarrassed hostess. "I fear I've ruined our cook's masterpiece." Her husband, understanding immediately what has happened, for he too knows about the toadstone and its properties, joins in the laughter and calls for fresh dessert to be brought from the kitchens. The servants, well trained in handling such domestic crises, quickly restore order and provide alternative sweets from the kitchen's reserves. The evening concludes with apparently mutual satisfaction. The guests depart with expressions of gratitude for their host's hospitality, promises to reciprocate the invitation, and assurances of continued friendship and cooperation. But Lady Eleanor notices that Lord Godwin's farewell seems particularly warm, his gratitude more effusive than the occasion warrants, his departure slightly more hurried than courtesy requires. Later, as she and her husband review the evening's events in the privacy of their solar, she shows him the toadstone ring. In the candlelight, the stone appears completely ordinary, indistinguishable from any common pebble, but they both know that its humble appearance conceals extraordinary power, that this simple object has saved their lives and possibly prevented a war. Master Aldwin's knowledge proves its worth once again, her husband observes, though I wonder how many of our neighbors know about toadstones and their properties. Lady Eleanor considers this. In a world where such protective measures are becoming common knowledge, poisoners must adapt their methods, must find ways to circumvent the defenses that their intended victims employ. The eternal dance between those who would kill and those who would survive grows ever more complex, ever more subtle, but for tonight at least, they are safe. The toadstone has performed its function, the poison has been detected and avoided, and their enemies have learned that Ravenscroft Castle's defenses extend beyond walls, and weapons to include the ancient wisdom that turns nature's humblest creatures into guardians against human malice. As Lady Eleanor removes the ring and places it carefully in her jewelry casket, she reflects on the strange world she inhabits, a world where survival depends on understanding the secret properties of toad skulls, where dinner parties are potential battlefields, where the difference between life and death might rest in the warming of a small, dark stone against the skin. But perhaps, she thinks, as sleep begins to claim her, all worlds are like this in their essence. Perhaps every age requires its own forms of protection against the poisons that human beings create for each other, its own versions of the toadstone's ancient wisdom. The understanding that safety comes not from innocence, but from knowledge, not from trust, but from preparation, not from hoping for the best, but from preparing for the worst, while still finding ways to live fully in the spaces between dangers. The toadstone rests silent in its golden setting, having done its work for another day, ready to serve again when poison next threatens to turn hospitality into murder, friendship into betrayal, the simple act of eating into the complex game of survival that defines the medieval world. Myth number 6. In the depths of the Black Forest, where ancient oaks interweave their branches into a canopy so thick that noon resembles twilight, a woodcutter named Heinrich pauses in his work to listen to sounds that make his blood run cold. The year is 1387, and he has lived his entire life on the forest's edge, has learned to read its moods like a sailor reads the sea. But tonight, the forest speaks in a language he has never heard before, a language of horn calls that echo from no earthly throat, of hoofbeats that drum against air rather than earth, of baying that seems to come from hounds bred in hell itself. The wild hunt is riding, and Heinrich knows with the certainty of ancestral memory that to be caught in its path means death or madness or something worse than either. He sets down his axe and begins to run, not toward his cottage but deeper into the forest, toward the sacred grove where his grandmother once taught him to hide when the old powers stirred and the boundary between the world of mortals and the world of spirits grew thin as a morning mist. Above him, though he dares not look up to confirm it, the hunt thunders through the treetops like a storm given form and purpose. The leader rides a horse whose hooves strike sparks from empty air, whose mane flows like liquid shadow, whose eyes burn with the cold fire of stars long dead. Behind him comes a pack of spectral riders, nobles and knights and common soldiers, united in death by their shared love of the chase, their faces pale as bone, their clothing the tattered remnants of the finery they wore in life. The hounds that run before them are not quite dogs and not quite wolves, but something more primal than either, creatures that exist at the intersection of hunt and nightmare, bred not for tracking deer or fox, but for pursuing the souls of the guilty, the oath breakers, the unrepentant dead who refuse to accept their fate. Their howling carries overtones that human ears were never meant to process, harmonies that speak of hungers that can never be satisfied, and pursuits that can never end. Heinrich reaches the sacred grove just as the hunt passes directly overhead, and he throws himself face down among the roots of an oak tree so old that its trunk could shelter a dozen men. The ground beneath him trembles with the force of their passage, and he feels rather than hears the leader's voice calling out in a language that might be ancient German or might be older than any human tongue. "Where are the guilty?" the voice demands, and the very trees seem to lean in to listen. "Where are those who have broken their oaths, who have betrayed their trust, who have taken what was not theirs to take? Let them come forth and face the judgment they have earned." But tonight, it seems, the guilty have found adequate hiding places, or perhaps there are simply no souls in this part of the forest dark enough to attract the hunt's attention. The spectral procession passes overhead without stopping, moving on toward other territories, other forests, other communities where justice delayed might finally be administered by forces that recognize no earthly authority. As the sound of the hunt fades into the distance, Heinrich slowly raises his head and peers through the forest canopy at the sky above. The moon, which had been bright and full when he began his evening's work, now appears dimmed, as if the hunt's passage has drawn some of its light into their eternal pursuit. The stars seem more distant, less friendly, as if they have turned their faces away from earthly concerns to avoid witnessing what the hunt might do when it finds its prey. In the village of Waldheim, 3 miles from where Heinrich huddles in his sacred grove, the mayor Gerhard von Bremen sits in his manor house and tries to ignore the sounds that drift through his shuttered windows. He knows what rides overhead. Every man, woman, and child in the region knows the stories, has heard the warnings passed down through generations of their ancestors. But knowing and experiencing are different things, and the reality of the wild hunt's presence fills him with a terror that no amount of rational thought can dispel. Von Bremen is not an innocent man. His position as mayor has required compromises, accommodations, the kind of moral flexibility that allows one to prosper in a world where absolute honesty is often indistinguishable from absolute poverty. He has accepted bribes, has manipulated legal decisions, has used his authority to benefit his friends and punish his enemies. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would mark him as particularly corrupt by the standards of his time and place, but enough to make him wonder whether the hunt's supernatural justice might consider him a suitable target. The sound of hoofbeats grows louder, more immediate, and von Bremen realizes with growing horror that the hunt is descending toward his village. He can hear individual voices now among the spectral riders, men and women calling out in languages both familiar and strange, their words carrying the authority of those who have moved beyond the need for earthly approval. "Gerhard von Bremen," calls a voice that freezes the blood in his veins. "You who have sold justice for silver, who have made the law serve your purse rather than your people, come forth and account for your deeds." The mayor's servants have already fled, abandoning their posts to seek whatever shelter they can find in cellar or forest or the illusory protection of prayer. Von Bremen stands alone in his great hall, surrounded by the tapestries and treasures that his corruption has purchased, understanding that no amount of wealth can protect him from the kind of judgment that rides with the wild hunt. The front door of his manor house explodes inward, though no physical force has touched it. The hunt's hounds pour through the opening like smoke given form, their eyes glowing with the cold light of absolute justice. Behind them come the riders, still mounted on their spectral horses, filling the hall with their presence, even though the ceiling should be too low to accommodate them. The leader of the hunt, some say he is Woden, the old god of wisdom and war, Others claim he is a mortal king, cursed to ride forever as punishment for his earthly sins, fixes von Bremen with a gaze that seems to penetrate not just his body, but his soul. You have grown fat on the misery of others, the figure intones, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You have made mockery of the trust your people placed in you. What defense do you offer? Von Bremen tries to speak, to offer explanations or justifications or pleas for mercy, but the words die in his throat. In the presence of perfect justice, imperfect excuses become impossible to voice. He can only stand there trembling as the hunt's judgment settles around him like a shroud. But instead of immediate destruction, the leader offers something unexpected, a choice. You may come with us now, he says, and serve in our company until your sins are purged through righteous pursuit of other wrongdoers. Or you may remain here and live out your natural span, but knowing that every corrupt decision, every stolen coin, every betrayal of trust will be remembered and accounted for when your time comes to face final judgment. It is not mercy exactly, but it is something more complex than simple vengeance. Von Bremen, his mind reeling with terror and possibility, chooses to remain among the living, to accept the burden of conscience that the hunt leaves behind like a gift, more terrible than punishment. As the spectral riders prepare to depart, the leader turns back one final time. Remember this night, Gerhard von Bremen. Remember that justice delayed is not justice denied, that there are powers that watch and wait and ride when the world's patience is exhausted. Use the time you have been given wisely. The hunt departs as suddenly as it came, leaving behind only the lingering scent of winter wind and ancient forests, the fading echo of hoofbeats that struck no earthly ground, the profound silence that follows when supernatural forces withdraw their attention from mortal affairs. Von Bremen spends the rest of the night sitting in his damaged hall, staring at the broken door and trying to comprehend what has happened to him. When morning comes, he begins the slow work of reforming his life, of using his position to serve justice rather than subvert it, of becoming the leader his people deserved rather than the one they had endured. In the forest, Heinrich finally emerges from his hiding place as the first light of dawn filters through the canopy above. The wild hunt has passed, taking with it the immediate danger, but leaving behind the knowledge that such forces exist, that somewhere beyond the veil of ordinary reality, justice rides eternal circuits through forests both physical and metaphysical. He returns to his cottage and his humble life, but he carries with him the memory of that night, when the old powers stirred, when the boundary between myth and reality dissolved completely, when the wild hunt rode through his forest and reminded him that some things are more permanent than human institutions, more reliable than earthly justice, more inevitable than the sunrise itself. The stories spread, as such stories always do, growing in the telling but never losing their essential truth. The wild hunt rides still, they say, through forests both real and imagined, pursuing a justice that mortal courts cannot provide, offering choices that mortal law cannot contemplate, reminding anyone who will listen that the universe itself has opinions about how we treat each other, and that those opinions sometimes take forms that our comfortable assumptions about reality cannot accommodate. In the growing light of day, the supernatural fades back into legend, but it never disappears entirely. It waits in the spaces between certainty and doubt, between what we know and what we fear, between the world as we understand it and the world as it might actually be when all our comfortable illusions are stripped away and only truth remains. Myth number 7. In the harbor town of Whitehaven, where salt spray mingles with the smoke from 100 chimneys, and the cry of gulls provides a constant chorus to human activity, midwife Martha Goodwin tends to a birth that will be remembered long after the child has grown to adulthood. The mother, young Catherine Marsh, wife of a fisherman whose nets have brought prosperity to his family, labors through the small hours of morning as autumn winds rattle the shutters and rain lashes against the windows of their cottage. Martha has delivered more children than she cares to count in her 40 years of practice, has seen births both blessed and cursed, easy and difficult, joyful and tragic. But as this particular child emerges into the world, she recognizes immediately that something extraordinary is happening. The infant is born not naked, as most babies come into the world, but wrapped in a translucent membrane, part of the amniotic sac that should have torn away during birth, but has instead clung to the child like a gossamer veil. "Blessed," Martha whispers, her voice carrying the awe that always accompanies encounters with the mysterious. This child is born with the call, born under a powerful sign. Catherine, exhausted from her labor but alert enough to hear the midwife's words, struggles to understand what this means for her newborn son. Is he well? Is it a curse or a blessing? Martha carefully removes the membrane, handling it with the reverence due to objects that partake of the sacred. The call is filmy and delicate, like silk spun from moonlight, marked with veins that seem to pulse with their own inner rhythm. A blessing, child, a great blessing. Your son has been marked by forces beyond our understanding. In the medieval mind, birth is always a passage between worlds, the child emerging from the watery realm of the womb into the airy realm of earthly life. But a child born with a call has made this passage while carrying with it a piece of that other world, a tangible connection to the mysterious realm from which all life emerges. Such children are said to possess gifts that ordinary mortals lack: the ability to see spirits, to predict storms, to communicate with the dead, to know things that cannot be learned through normal means. Martha wraps the call carefully in a piece of clean linen, explaining to Catherine its value and significance. "This must be preserved," she says solemnly, "kept dry and safe, never allowed to decay or be destroyed. For as long as the call remains intact, your son will be protected from drowning. He will have power over water, will be able to read the moods of rivers and seas, will never perish in flood or storm." The midwife has seen the truth of this herself, knows sailors who carry pieces of call in their sea chests, merchants who pay extraordinary sums for the membranes, fishermen who would rather face a tempest without their nets than without a call charm sewn into their clothing. The protection such talismans provide is not superstition, but documented fact, proven again and again by the survival of those who possess them and the drowning of those who do not. Word of young Thomas Marsh's call birth spreads through Whitehaven like ripples on a disturbed pond. By evening, despite the late hour and the continuing storm, visitors begin arriving at the cottage door. Not casual well-wishers or curious neighbors, but people with serious purpose. Sea captains preparing for dangerous voyages, fishermen's wives whose husbands work the treacherous waters off the northern coast, merchants whose trade requires crossing rivers and channels where even the most experienced sailors sometimes perish. Captain James Blackwood is the first to arrive, a weathered man whose 40 years at sea have taught him to respect every source of protection the ocean might accept. He carries with him a purse heavy with silver coins, enough to support the Marsh family through several hard winters, and his request is simple. He wishes to purchase a portion of the call to carry on his ship. I sail next month for the Baltic, he explains to the assembled family. The autumn storms there are fierce, and I've lost good men to waters that seemed calm one moment and turned deadly the next. A call charm sewn into my coat might mean the difference between bringing my crew home safe or leaving their families to mourn. Other offers follow. Mary Weatherby, whose son serves on a merchant vessel trading between England and Flanders, offers a year's worth of wool from her sheep in exchange for a small piece of the membrane. Old Samuel Creek, who remembers when calls were common and children born with them were celebrated as gifts to their communities, provides wise counsel about how the membrane should be divided and preserved. Cut it carefully, he advises Martha, drawing on knowledge passed down from his own grandmother. Each piece, no matter how small, carries the full power of the whole, but never cut it carelessly. Never waste even the smallest fragment, for what you're dividing is not just membrane, but protection itself, blessing itself, the grace that allows mortals to survive in realms not meant for them. Martha works through the night with the precision of a master craftsman, using her sharpest knife to divide the call into portions that can serve multiple needs while preserving a significant piece for Thomas himself. Each cut is made with prayer and careful attention to the membrane's natural structure, following the patterns of veins and fibers that give it its strength and power. Some pieces she shapes into amulets that can be worn around the neck. Others she prepares as talismans to be sewn into clothing or tucked into the corners of sea chests. The largest portion she reserves for the child's own protection, wrapping it in silk and placing it in a wooden box that will preserve it throughout his lifetime. As she works, Martha explains to the gathered buyers the proper care of call charms. They must never get wet, she instructs, for water will dissolve their power as surely as it dissolves salt. They must be kept in darkness, wrapped in cloth that has never been dyed, protected from heat and cold alike. Treat them with respect, speak to them with reverence, and they will serve you faithfully for as long as you live. The economic impact of Thomas's birth extends far beyond the immediate sale of call portions. The Marsh family, previously struggling to maintain their position in the town's complex social hierarchy, suddenly finds itself elevated to a status approaching minor nobility. People who once treated them with casual indifference now approach with respectful deference, understanding that they have become the guardians of something precious and powerful. Catherine discovers that her status as the mother of a call child brings its own benefits and responsibilities. Other women seek her advice on matters of pregnancy and childbirth, believing that her experience with supernatural birth has given her special knowledge. She finds herself serving as an informal counselor to expectant mothers, sharing not just practical wisdom, but the deeper understanding that comes from having participated in the mystery of creation's occasional departures from normal patterns. Young Thomas, still an infant but already marked by destiny, grows under the watchful eyes of a community that sees him as both blessing and responsibility. Sailors, returning from dangerous voyages, stop by the cottage to report that their call charms held firm, that waters that claimed other vessels spared those protected by portions of his birth membrane. Such reports only enhance the family's reputation and increase the demand for any remaining pieces of the precious caul. But Martha understands that the true significance of caul births extends beyond their practical applications. Children born with the veil are said to possess not just protection from drowning, but insight into the deeper mysteries of existence. They can see spirits that remain invisible to ordinary eyes, can predict weather changes with uncanny accuracy, can sometimes communicate with the dead or glimpse events that have not yet come to pass. As Thomas grows, Martha watches for signs of these supernatural gifts. Does he stare at the empty corners as if seeing something there? Does he cry before storms arrive, even when the sky shows no warning signs? Does he react to the presence of people who died before his birth, but whose spirits might still linger in familiar places? Such abilities, if they manifest, will mark Thomas for a life unlike that of ordinary mortals. He may become a wise woman's assistant, learning the arts of healing and divination. He might serve as a ship's weather reader, using his supernatural sight to guide vessels safely through dangerous waters. Or he could become a medium, helping others communicate with deceased loved ones, bridging the gap between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Whatever path his life takes, Thomas Marsh will walk it under the protection of forces that most people never encounter directly. His birth caul, preserved in its silk wrapping, will serve as both shield and reminder, protection against the particular dangers that water poses to human life, and evidence that the boundary between the natural and supernatural worlds is more permeable than most people imagine. In the harbor outside his cottage window, ships come and go carrying sailors who have learned to trust in caul charms alongside more conventional protections like compass and anchor. The sea that could kill them remains as dangerous as ever, but their chances of survival have increased measurably through contact with the mystery that emerged from Catherine Marsh's womb on that storm-lashed night when the boundaries between worlds grew thin enough for blessing to pass through. The midwife Martha continues her work, attending other births, helping other families navigate the complex transition from pregnancy to parenthood. But she carries with her always the memory of that extraordinary delivery, the reminder that sometimes the ordinary process of birth produces results that exceed all normal expectations, that the world contains more wonders than rational minds can easily accommodate, and that the difference between life and death sometimes comes down to possessing something as fragile and precious as a piece of membrane that refused to break away when a special child chose to enter the world. And so, we have walked together through the shadowed halls of memory, where medieval minds conceived wonders that seem impossible to our modern understanding, yet carry within them truths that transcend the centuries between their time and ours. Strange tales, perhaps, but no stranger than the world that created them. A world where mystery was not something to be solved, but something to be lived with, where the boundary between the possible and impossible was drawn in shifting sand. We have seen the basilisk in its chamber of induced death, a creature born from the unnatural union of serpent and fowl, whose very existence served as a warning about what happens when natural boundaries are crossed without wisdom or reverence. We have heard the whispers surrounding Pope Joan, the woman who may have worn the papal crown, whose story speaks to questions about identity, authority, and the assumptions we make about who is capable of wielding power. We have listened to the screams of mandrake roots torn from soil enriched by human suffering, plants that grew in the shape of tiny people and cried out with voices that could kill the unprepared listener. We have walked beside the wandering Jew on his eternal journey, carrying with him the weight of a single moment's failure of compassion, a reminder that our choices echo through time in ways we cannot always foresee. We have examined the toadstone's humble magic, the belief that common creatures could carry within their heads the power to detect poison and protect the innocent from those who would do them harm. We have hidden from the wild hunt as it thundered through midnight forests, dispensing a justice that earthly courts could not provide, offering choices that mortal law could not contemplate. And we have seen the blessing of children born with calls, those lucky few who entered the world carrying with them a piece of the watery realm from which all life emerges, protected by membranes that connected them to mysteries their parents could scarcely understand. Some myths were strange, some dark, some beautiful in their impossibility, but all were mirrors of what people feared, longed for, or couldn't explain, attempts to make sense of a world that often seemed senseless, to find meaning in suffering, purpose in chaos, hope in circumstances that offered little rational basis for optimism. The medieval mind that created these stories was not primitive or credulous as we sometimes imagine, but rather practical in ways that our more sophisticated age has perhaps forgotten. It understood that reality contains more layers than the purely physical, that human experience encompasses more dimensions than the merely rational, that the forces that shape our lives often operate according to principles that cannot be reduced to simple cause and effect. These forgotten myths remind us that wonder is not the enemy of understanding, but its companion, that mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be embraced, that the stories we tell about the impossible often contain the most important truths about what it means to be human in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than our daily experience suggests. In the flickering candlelight of medieval memory, these tales glow with their own inner fire, not the harsh illumination of electric bulbs that reveals everything and creates no shadows, but the gentler light of flame that creates as much mystery as it dispels, that reminds us that some things are better seen in soft focus, better understood through intuition than analysis, better preserved in story than in fact. And now, if your eyes are heavy with the weight of these ancient tales, let them close. The myths can wait. They have waited centuries already, and they possess the patience that comes from knowing that truth, once spoken, never really disappears, but only rests in the quiet places of memory until someone needs to hear it again. The fire still crackles beside us, casting warm light on the weathered pages where these stories sleep between tellings. Tomorrow there will be more stories to share, more mysteries to explore, more ancient voices ready to whisper their secrets to those who know how to listen. But tonight, let the medieval world fade gently into the realm of dreams, where basilisks might yet lurk in shadowed chambers, where the wild hunt still rides through forests of the imagination, where children born with calls grow up to see wonders that daylight cannot contain. Sleep well, dreamer, in the knowledge that the boundary between myth and reality is thinner than we pretend, that wonder still walks in the world for those who have eyes to see it, and that the stories we tell in the darkness often carry more light than all the facts we accumulate in the brightness of day. The candles burn lower now, their flames dancing like the spirits of long-dead storytellers who gather around every fire where ancient tales are told. Let their gentle light guide you toward rest. Let their warmth comfort you through the hours of darkness. Let their flickering remind you that some flames never die, but only wait to be rekindled by voices that remember how to speak the old words in the old ways. The medieval myths settle into silence now, but it is not the silence of endings, but of pauses. The quiet space between one story and the next, between one dreamer and another, between one night and the morning that will surely come, bringing with it new possibilities for wonder, new chances to believe in things that rational minds insist cannot be true, but that dreaming hearts know are more real than reality itself. Rest now, gentle listener, surrounded by stories that have outlasted kingdoms and will outlast us all, protected by the ancient wisdom that the best tales are not the ones that make perfect sense, but the ones that make perfect magic, not the ones that answer all our questions, but the ones that remind us that some questions are more beautiful than any answer could ever be. The fire whispers its own stories now, tales told in the language of spark and ember, smoke and shadow. And in that whispered narrative, you can hear the echo of all the stories ever told, all the myths ever dreamed, all the impossible truths that human hearts have carried through the long darkness of history toward whatever dawn waits beyond the horizon of sleep. Sweet dreams, traveler. May your rest be deep and peaceful. May your dreams be filled with wonders, and may you wake refreshed and ready for whatever stories tomorrow brings to the eternal campfire, where myth and reality meet to share their ancient secrets with those wise enough to listen and gentle enough to believe.